Well, it's that time of the year again. It must be, because I'm with Tom.
Morning.
Having a breakfast at Morrison's, because it is Phex 2022. Me and Tom only meet up for breakfast when it's Phex 2022.
On a Wednesday, not a Thursday this time.
Oh, it's Wednesday, yeah. But I'm going Wednesday and Thursday.
Anyway.
We're getting stuck into the breakfast. I will catch you in a bit. So even though we go every year to Phex, the main reason for us going to Phex 2022 this year is so we can see the changes Ideal have made to their logic boilers. So let's get on with it. So here we are, Tom, Theatre of Dreams.
Yeah.
You're looking forward to it?
I'll tell you what, the only good thing what come out of it was that result on Sunday, wasn't it?
Yeah, okay. Well, don't
season.
Don't get frightened by the crowds, will you? Because you're not used to it, are you? Unless you're at United.
And none of them are City United fans, are they?
Bitter City fan, even though they did hammer us at the weekend. Phex is the UK's longest established plumbing and heating exhibition. It unites manufacturers and suppliers with installers and contractors at unique sporting football venues. We're here at Phex Manchester on the 5th and 6th of October, and then we've got Phex Chelsea, which takes place on the 16th to the 17th of November at Stamford Bridge in London. Also at the exhibition, you get a free whistle-stop tour of the stadium, and the best thing is, you get a free lunch and a brew. Now, what we're going to do in this video is we're going to look at the progression of the Logic range of Ideal boilers. So we're here at Phex to look at the new version, and we're going to compare how the new version has changed with these older versions. As usual, we normally, when I talk about boilers, is start at the top and work my way down the boiler. So we'll do the same thing. These are quite old, these boilers, but the Logic range pretty much has stayed like this from when it was launched way back in 2009. It's only until now where we've got some drastic changes on the front. So you can see on the older boilers we have 4 control knobs. We then went to 3 control knobs. But on the new boiler we've only got 2 control knobs. Also, you'll see the screen here is now a lot bigger on the new one than it is on the old one, and the overall case looks a little bit nicer. Now the new one has kind of the flap like it does on the Vogue, whereas the old Logic, this is an independent but it's the same thing, had this flap which was magnetic and came down. So the front of the boilers has changed quite a bit, but the actual case itself hasn't. It's still the same footprint with the new one as with all these range of boilers. Things what have also stayed the same are, it's still the same bracket. So technically you could take an old Ideal Logic off the wall, leave the bracket on the wall and put the new one on. Why you would want to do that, I don't know, but you could do. Another thing what stayed the same is the flue system and the flue elbow. That still stayed exactly the same, and this is one of the telescopic ones. But yeah, that stayed the same. Sample points have stayed the same. They changed quite a few years ago, but they've kept that style. This is the old sample point they used to have before they changed to the ones in the flue elbow. Now another thing what stayed the same with the flue system is the horseshoe clamp. So it's still the same as this one. Now this is the first gen one where they didn't have the retaining screw what held it in. It was just held in with a little clip on the end there which kept popping off. So they changed it for this one, but they've kept that. There is a seal inside, and this seal's causing quite a few problems. So what they've done on the new one is they've now made this seal fixed in the top of here rather than it being loose, because what it did was, when you put your flue elbow onto the boiler, it kind of rode up a bit, and if you took your elbow off again, that didn't go down far enough and was leaking inside and caused corrosion at the bottom. So that's really the only change on the flue system, is that they've made this seal now fixed with inside the boiler. Now another component that has moved 3 times is the pressure gauge. Now on the first gen, it started off down here on the flow valve. Then they moved it up here, and now they've moved it behind the flap. And the last thing we're going to look at before we actually dive inside the boilers is what's happened to preheat then. So here you can see we've got a preheat switch which is off and on. Now everybody seems to hate preheat at the moment because it wastes energy. So what preheat does is it warms your plate to plate heat exchanger, so it tries to give you hot water all the time, quickly. Now Ideal have changed that, and instead of having an on-off feature, we've now got a smart preheat feature which actually learns when you're in. So while you're out at work or school or college or not in the place at all, it won't put the preheat on. It learns that you're not there, and when you come back in, it will then preheat the plate for you, ready to give you hot water. It's an effort at trying to save energy, isn't it? Now let's take the cover off the old one. Basically it's 2 screws underneath here, the same on the new one, 2 clips, and it just lifts off. Taking the new one off is exactly the same way, and we're left with the flap, and we just need to put the flap down, and again on the new one it's exactly the same. So the first thing we can see on the old version is this fan. Now if we look at the new version, it looks pretty much the same, but it's been updated and is slightly quieter than this old fan. Now if we just come a bit further down, the burner has pretty much stayed the same, but the heat exchanger has had a little few modifications on it. Now the first one is on this old heat exchanger, you can see we've got our ignition and flame rectification as separate components. But on the new version, they've got rid of the flame rectification on its own and incorporated it with the ignition. Now another subtle little change here at the top end of the boiler is the spark generator. Now this spark generator hasn't changed position, they've just changed the spark generator, and they're now using the same spark generator as what they use in the Vogue boiler. So that's a big change here at the top of the heat exchanger. The next change is, as we move further down here on the old one, you can see the gas valve is just here underneath the fan. But if we have a look at the new version, the gas valve has been moved down to behind where the trap is. Now the reason for this, Ideal say, is a safety reason, because this connection here on the bottom of the gas valve, people might have been leaving that leaking and not being able to tell it was leaking, whereas underneath now where the connection is under the boiler, if you do undo that connection, you're going to leave a smell of gas. So that's why they say they've moved it from here to down the bottom of the boiler. Now let's have a look at the changes made to the water set, but we'll start with the condensate trap. Now to remove the trap on the old boiler, we need to first of all take off this little rubber boot, and we need to twist the trap to the left, and then it lifts out. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to let John Hudson, who's the Senior Area Sales Manager for Ideal, show us how to remove the condensate trap on the new boiler.
Our condensate trap slightly moved from mid to the left. New way to fix it in. I don't know if you can zoom in on that little plastic leg there, but you can see quarter turn to get it out. That little plastic leg slides into the seam of the case, so it's that locks it in place. So cool. Quarter turn and it's straight out, so nice and easy.
Now one of the biggest changes on the water set is the pressure relief valve. So you can see this little red top here is the old version of the pressure relief valve. The new one has now been moved to this side of the water set, and again we're going to get John from Ideal to show us the new pressure relief valve.
Safety valve obviously is much easier, got a front central location, access wise, clip fixing, so clip out, And our safety valve now, you can just literally pop it out, and there's your safety valve. That's that swage kind of 13mm copper that we spoke about.
Yeah.
So our PRV, we can imagine, that's coming through the boiler. Our 15mm is sliding up and over underneath the rubber, and that ring will kind of grab that. So that's how that works.
Great idea. Now, because of the changes from the PRV and the condensate trap, there's obviously changes underneath. So let's have a quick look at those on the old one first before we look under the new one. So let's start with the pipe layout first. So this one here with the pressure gauge on is your flow. This is your hot water out, your gas connection in, your cold water in, and your return. Now this, what we can see here, is the pressure relief valve pipe, and this is actually wrong because this should have been a compression fitting here, not this soldered fitting. So whoever fitted it originally is wrong. And then you can see here, this is where the condensate pipe goes onto, and this is where the trap fits in and the locking mechanism for the trap. So that's what it looks like under the old one. And again, let's get over to John and see exactly what the new one has to offer now.
Flow return, hot cold gas, they're all in the same orientation, the same location, so swapping the boiler from the old one to new is easy. Obviously the big two changes, your condensate outlet is there, which is further back, so that neatens that up because it's closer to the wall. And that's the new push fit PRV connection. As you can just about see that little 15mm tail popping through there, that's actually swage copper down to about 13mm, and then your 15mm blow off pipe will come up and in there underneath that clip, and it's kind of like a fast fit push fit PRV. And obviously all the other connections are exactly the same.
Now, another change, what has happened to the boiler is the wiring and some of the electronics. So we're going to go back over to John again because he knows far more about it than I do. So let's get back over to John then.
Wiring, so we've moved away from the old wiring where we have those kind of thick black plastic kind of foam guided, which most installers didn't actually get on so well because it was really, really tight. If you were trying to pull 4 or 5 core back through, it was really difficult. So we've got rid of those, gone back to a kind of an open clamp type system where you've got a lot more space, and a traditional electrical kind of block connector, which again a lot more space if you want to bridge between the terminals. We've got our low voltage and our high voltage separate, so there's our low volt side, so we've got our weather condensation, our open flame, and obviously we can see they're both separate, so we can work on one, or we can work on, split them apart, high volt, low volt. The other thing that's changed is the thermistors. So currently we have a wet pocket thermistor that sits in the heat exchanger kind of around there, and we have a dry pocket thermistor that just literally sits on that return plate there with that little brass clip. And we've moved away from that purely for the reason that more and more people are asking, can we have preheated cold coming into the boiler so the boiler doesn't have to work so hard? And at the minute we have to say no, because that return thermistor wouldn't, it's not fast enough in recognising temperature fluctuation. By the time it realised, the boiler would split really, really hot water out, and it would be dangerous, in terms of scalding. So the minute we say, unfortunately, you can't run preheated cold into your logic boiler, but now we can. We've got our wet pocket thermistor in our flow. There's another wet pocket thermistor just in the incoming cold side, and then there's a return wet pocket thermistor just in the kind of on the back of the pump housing. So now we've got wet pocket thermistors, we've got 3 of them really quickly and accurately measure what's happening with, obviously with the water temperature inside the hydro block. So we can now say it's fine to use preheated cold into the boiler. You can cope with it and it won't deliver that crazy hot water out.
Fantastic. So that's what's changed on the inside. Let's go back to these controls out here and back to John and find out what's happened here then.
Bigger screen, as you rightly say. Dials wise, you'll notice that there's no starts and stops on the dials.
Yeah.
So we get some instances where, whether it's students, tenants, whoever, turn those too hard and then they obviously snap and they break the potentiometer dials, which means we have to go and put a new PCB on the boiler.
Yeah.
We don't have that now, so obviously as you can see they just spin all the way around.
Right.
Menu-wise, everything that's in the current logic of both is still in there.
Right.
So all of these things we give you already, your name, your number, your change of the service time, fault history, fault health, venting options, sensor readings, all these things are here. What is new and really, really clever is that cooling mode. So cooling mode, if you've got to service the boiler and it's been running, obviously the burner will be hot, the heat exchanger will be hot, and you won't be able to service it obviously till it cools down. If you run it in cooling mode, it'll run the fan, it'll run the pump, but it won't fire the burner. So any latent heat, any heat that it's gathered, it will just fire it straight out the boiler. So it'll cool it down really, really quickly. So you can crack on and do your servicing.
Fantastic.
Pump modulation is in there. Diverter valve lid is already in there. That's another feature. So condensate trap priming, we put that on there because some other products do have it. It'll run the boiler in condensing mode and it'll fill the trap itself. To be honest, most installers will just put water down the flue and fill the trap that way, and you can still do that. So it's literally the installer's choice. And then our graphs are in there, and our maximum flow switch is in there. The ability to restrict rather than 80 degrees, we can turn that to, we restrict it down to 72, for example. Enter. If I turn my heating up to maximum now, just get rid of that lockout. You'll see now that I can't get past 72 degrees maximum, and my little eco mode, that will always be there. If I've got heating flow temperature at 72 or lower, my green little eco, that will always stay there. Right. So it's an encouragement, obviously, for the end user to leave it in eco mode in condensing mode.
Fantastic.
So that's kind of the
massive big changes on that, really, isn't there?
Mode selector, if you like. So winter, summer, off is now one of the smart keys into there. So if we want to change it, we just obviously select which one we change. So we haven't lost any features.
Now I would just like to thank John for taking me through all the changes of the new Logic range of ideal boilers. Hope you've liked the video. Catch you on the next one. Cheers, guys.